Story 1. 3 days, but I don't remember much. I was very young, and after the second day, I started seeing things. I was around 8. Story 2. I experienced 12 days of withdrawal from medications that I should have never taken due to a misdiagnosis. This made my Tourette's syndrome tics significantly worse, resulting in sleepless nights. Whenever I tried to relax, my muscles would cramp and spasm so severely that it felt like I was being torn apart. The only relief I found was in movement. Ultimately, I walked myself into a state of insanity and woke up in a mental hospital with no recollection of how I got there. Story 3. About 5 days during a severe episode of insomnia, I thought I would soon die. That was 5 years ago, and I survived. Story 4. Only 2 days after giving birth to my second child, my husband had to leave the hospital because we didn't have anyone to take our oldest to school the next day. The baby cluster-fed the entire night, and the next day I experienced terrible anxiety, so even when we got home, I couldn't sleep that first night. Due to the lack of sleep and the hormonal shifts after giving birth, I developed significant postpartum anxiety during the first month. I would get about 3 hours of sleep a night and couldn't take naps or eat at all. Story 5. After some time awake, your brain begins to enter a state of partial sleep. This phenomenon has been widely studied. You may feel fully awake, but there are brief moments when your brain is actually resting. Story 6. State Police Academy. I was very stressed, and they woke me up at night to yell at me. I didn't sleep for 4 days straight, and my heart raced all night. I started hearing things, seeing visions, and I struggled with my memory. Story 7. Approximately 85 hours due to a pinched nerve in my neck. You begin to contemplate dark thoughts around the third night. Story 8. As a kid, it was different for me. I have always struggled with sleep. Usually, it would get so bad that I would have nosebleeds and fall asleep on the stairs at my school during the day. When I was around 21 or 22, I had a job writing algorithms for what would become a financial technology company. We found a bug in the software that cost one of our clients $300,000. Took me a full week to find the bug. I had no sleep, just coding. It was absolutely the worst I have ever experienced. I routinely work 22-hour shifts in hostels, and my current job has me working 57 days straight with only 4 hours of sleep a night, if I even get that. I truly envy people who can sleep. Story 9. Over 50 hours. Why? Because I wasn't tired. I had to force myself to go to sleep at the end because I was concerned for my health. Story 10. 3 days straight playing Diablo 2 in the early 2000s. Every few months, the ladder ranking system resets, and everyone starts over with a new character. There's a leaderboard showing who has the highest level characters, and it's basically a race to see who can reach level 99 the fastest. I stayed up for 3 days straight and was second on the ladder before I had to go on a trip that my parents obviously wouldn't let me skip. Story 11. Sober, working as a paramedic. Completed a 7-hour class, followed by a 24-hour shift, then another 7-hour class and a 10 to 12-hour shift. Trying to fit in the countless hours needed. Drugs, a bit more. It's kind of fun until the shadows begin to invade your peripheral vision. Story 12. Something like 36 to 48 hours at most. Pull an all-nighter and either crash out midday the next day or early that evening. I can't recall a time when I stayed awake without even a nap for 2 full nights and days and made it into the third day. That is really unhealthy for humans to do. Story 13. 1 week. I took a few naps, totaling 5 hours. It was finals week, and I had started taking medication about a month prior. Naturally, I was behind in most of my classes and worked nonstop that week. Story 14. A little more than 2 days. Just college partying, nothing exciting. I was so tired that I was afraid to go to sleep, thinking if I fell asleep, I wouldn't wake up. Story 15. 48 hours. It was horrible. I was just surviving on caffeine and nicotine. I worked for a privately owned security company, and they needed workers for a long weekend. I was 22 and thought I was invincible, so I agreed to work for 48 hours. At one point, I think I was hallucinating. Story 16. I experienced 94 hours of severe physical pain from health issues and fear of sleeping due to post-traumatic stress disorder nightmares that became more intense. By the third day, I felt like a zombie and started hallucinating around the 80 to 85-hour mark. It was brutal, and I would rather die than go through that again. If I had stayed awake another 10 hours, I believe I would have lost my mind. Story 17. 6 days due to substance addiction. After day 4, I was afraid to sleep because I was so tired I thought I might die if I shut my eyes. I haven't used since 2007. Story 18. 76 hours and some change. I have a bad case of insomnia. I still experience it occasionally, but it has become less frequent. Story 19. 96 hours. For days straight. Why? Because I was in college and wanted to see if I could. By the end, I was almost psychotic. My roommate would do the HAL 9000 voice from 2001, A Space Odyssey, and I would freak out. To be fair, some substances may have been involved as well. Then I slept for about 2 days. Story 20. 3 or 4 days. It was in college when I thought taking 4 studio courses in 1 semester was a brilliant idea. I distinctly remember working late on a project and seeing my table leg turn into a tentacle for a brief moment. That's when I finally decided to give up and went to bed. Story 21. A little over 2 days, I was in labor while receiving magnesium intravenously. I had no sleep and no food, and it felt like I was in hell. I got 30 minutes of sleep when they finally gave me Demerol. Then I woke up and immediately gave birth. Story 22. 3 to 4 days when I was in college, I was playing World of Warcraft and suddenly became a guild leader. It's comical looking back. Story 23. 3 days with a baby suffering from colic felt endless. The crying never stopped, leaving me exhausted. Each night seemed eternal, with every minute dragging on. I genuinely started seeing things that weren't there. Then I found Koliev, and we both finally had the best night's sleep ever. Broken sleep is the same as no sleep if you don't reach rapid eye movement sleep. I remember rocking him while thinking, when did I order penguins to be in his room at night? Story 24. 17 days after my old intravenous methamphetamine addiction, I had to constantly be on the move, walking 30 to 40,000 steps a day. If I sat down on my bed or couch just to breathe for a moment, I would almost pass out from my body feeling safe and content. Story 25. Around 4 days. The Marine Corps can be challenging. By day 3, I started hallucinating heavily and would fall asleep while walking, resulting in walking into walls. NoDoz and energy drinks only keep you awake for so long. Story 26. 5 days of a wild episode occurred while I was severely mentally ill and without the support of doctors, as I was coming off all my psychiatric medications. Story 27. I was working on a project for sculpture class for 3 days. I fell asleep about 10 times during the critique and almost drove off the road multiple times on the way home. When I got to my place, I crawled into bed and slept for 20 hours straight. Story 28. I went 5 full days without even laying down for a second. I have bipolar I disorder, and it was caused by a severe manic episode. I ended up experiencing psychosis around day 3 of no sleep, and it progressively got worse until I ended up in the hospital. It was overwhelming. Story 29. Without performance enhancers, I was awake for around 46 hours, experiencing stress and anxiety. I woke up at 2 a.m. one morning and couldn't sleep. The next night, I just tossed and turned until the sun came up and had to go to work. I finally passed out around midnight the following evening, which was a Friday. I slept almost 12 hours into Saturday. With performance enhancers during college on the Friday morning before the Super Bowl, a roommate asked if I wanted to stay up until the game. I made it through the Super Bowl and then crashed for almost 20 hours. Story 30. My record is 30 hours when we were taking turns playing Bard's Tale on the Commodore 128. No one wanted to sleep because that would mean missing critical clues about the different areas. Story 31. I went 12 nights without sleep after a terrible breakup a couple of years ago. On the 13th day, I admitted myself to a mental hospital. Story 32. 38 hours during college writing papers that I procrastinated on. There was always a second wind the morning of the second day. It is a very specific feeling that I haven't experienced since then. Story 33. I spent 3 to 4 days at college after consuming 148 caffeinated mints marketed as gamer food. Each mint was equivalent to a full cup of coffee in caffeine content. By the end, I was hallucinating, and my doctor was concerned that my heart might explode. Story 34. I used to take large doses of Adderall. I went 96 hours without sleep. After 72 hours, I began to experience auditory and visual hallucinations. Story 35. I once slept just 6 hours over the course of a full week. I have struggled with insomnia since I was a young teenager. During that week, I went at most 2 days without any sleep at all. By the end of the week, I was genuinely hallucinating from sleep deprivation. Story 36. 3 times a week. I go over 24 hours without sleep for work. I work 12-hour night shifts and look after my toddler during the day, so I don't have time to sleep before my night shift. Story 37. For 5 days, I worked overnight shifts while being a full-time student. I had to stay up because it was finals week, and I couldn't skip work. Those 5 days were the worst of my life so far. I was mentally exhausted and physically a zombie. By the end of the week, I felt like a walking corpse. It was so overwhelming that I couldn't even hold my phone without dropping it. Story 38. A week of night shifts, depression, and generally being a poor sleeper all conspired to take a toll on me. I just could not sleep during the day. Story 39. 1.5 days because of my NEET preparation. NEET is an Indian exam that must be passed to gain admission into medical college. Story 40. 40 hours back in 2014 due to Eid. It's a long story, but that happened at a very young age and it was not a problem at all. Story 41. About 40 hours in spring 2015, I woke up on a Sunday morning in New York City. I spent the day as a tourist and drove home to Toronto that evening. Arriving around 2 a.m., I watched the new episode of Mad Men. As it was the final season and I wanted to avoid spoilers, realizing I had to be at work in a few hours, I stayed up. After work, I came home and went to bed after dinner, but my eyes were blurry. Story 42. The trip lasted around 35 to 45 hours, traveling from the UK to Florida while supervising students. There were long layovers and I couldn't sleep on the plane. I didn't want to sleep upon returning because I would have felt horribly jet-lagged, so I pushed through and went rock climbing to stay awake. I went to sleep at a reasonable local time and woke up 7 hours later feeling completely normal and at ease. All the students were exhausted for about a week while recovering from the jet lag. It was totally worth it. Story 43. I spent 3 days as a child with my friend. We stayed at each other's houses and played video games. Eventually, I fell asleep, but my friend fell asleep on the bus ride home. He woke up in a town miles away from where he was supposed to get off, and someone had stolen his belongings from his pockets while he was unconscious. Story 44. I spent 60 hours in the submarine force where we had a problem with our starboard torpedo tubes. I served as the chief torpedo man. Story 45. 3 days. I was running parts for our artillery maintenance unit while in the army. I was nearly constantly driving across Germany. Story 46. 24 hours. My friends were surprised that I had never pulled an all-nighter. It was horrible, especially because I was by myself for the second half. I hated it. I'm not sure if it would be better with people. Story 47. 3 or 4 days. My mom went to the Kentucky Derby, and my brother was supposed to watch us. He invited several people, and some of them kept trying to enter my room. I stayed up playing Grand Theft Auto and essentially kept interrupting a group of teenagers. Story 48. I was taking care of a live-action role-playing event and was in charge of food and drink. Any downtime was spent on the castle fort cake I was making. By the end, I was hallucinating in my kitchen. I slept about 14 hours afterward. Story 49. 52 hours playing The Legend of Zelda. Link to the Past, followed by my longest sleep of 25 hours, during which I thought I had only slept for an hour. Story 50. I couldn't fall asleep one night and spent several hours playing a new video game. When I got out of bed the next morning, it had been about 30 hours. Story 51. 64 hours in the fall of 2011. I was a freshman in high school and eagerly anticipating the release of the Battlefield 3 open beta. I woke up for school Friday morning at 6 a.m. and didn't go to bed until 10 p.m. Sunday night. I slept over at my friend's house, and we gamed in his basement all weekend. I progressed from 0 to max level in the beta and unlocked everything. I consumed around 10 energy drinks and 30 sodas. By Sunday morning, I was shivering and experiencing significant brain fog, the closest I felt to what dying might be like. I also worked out twice during that time because I had football practice. I always joke that one weekend shortened my life by a couple of years for sure. Story 52. 36 hours and some change due to work and a sick family member who needed immediate attention. That was difficult. Story 53. I spend about 36 to 40 hours partying and using drugs a couple of times. I struggle with sleep and require a lot of it. During my partying, I often go several days with very little sleep, totaling around 10 to 12 hours over 4 days. Story 54. I spend about 38 hours dealing with drugs and wanting to be away from home. I finally broke down and decided to sleep in my car in a park at 2 p.m. It was not my proudest moment. Story 55. 36 hours. Some of us realized we had accidentally reached 24 hours and wanted to see if we could make it to 36 in college. I was one of the few who succeeded. Story 56. I work nights from 10:30 p.m. to 6:30 a.m., and I generally only work every other weekend. I don't really sleep during the day unless it's Sunday morning. I've been up for anywhere from 24 to 30 hours to be on a semi-normal daytime schedule. Story 57. I once did a 44-hour session. I was in graduate school and was trying to obtain some laboratory results before attending a conference a day or two later. Story 58. Lamictal, also known as lamotrigine, is used for bipolar disorder and caused insomnia for about 4 years. It took a lot of discussion with my medication provider before I decided to stop taking it independently and avoid doctors and therapy for about 3 years afterward. The Med Detectives podcast was affirming, as another woman shared her horror story about being on this drug. Doctors do not always know you best, so never hesitate to advocate for yourself, even if others think you are a nuisance. You know yourself best. Story 59. 3 full days to meet a deadline. I was the photo editor for a university yearbook. I went into the darkroom on Friday night and didn't leave, except for bathroom breaks, until Monday morning. I have no idea how I managed it. Story 60. I stayed awake for 108 hours because I am an insomniac, which is much better now. At that time, I was extremely sick and couldn't get any sleep. After being awake for 4.5 days, I took a strong medication and literally slept for an entire day. It was amazing. Story 61. Sometime in high school, I stayed awake for 72 hours straight. I don't know what it was, but I felt wide awake and energetic for 3 days. Then, on the 4th day, I completely crashed. It was the weirdest experience, and I remember thinking that there was something medically wrong with me. Seeing the sun rise and fall for 3 days with no physical consequences felt so jarring. My appetite was normal, and I went to the bathroom as usual. It was just the lack of sleep. These days, I feel exhausted after 14 hours, and I'm 29. Story 62. I spent 3 days with a total of maybe 4 hours of sleep. I experienced an insomniac episode and finally had to visit the doctor, who prescribed sleeping medication to help me rest. That wasn't my choice. If we're discussing sleep by choice, I'd estimate around 30 hours because I was wired on New Year's once. Story 63. In 2019, I studied and wrote exams for 7 days, getting only 4 hours of sleep. In 2020, I spent 3 days reading novels. In 2022, my job sent me far from home and threatened to dismiss me if I did not go. In 2023, I had a lot to accomplish over a span of 2 days. Story 64. In 2 days, it's the final project for my college, and I have to stay up finishing 80 pages of architectural drawings and a model of my buildings. Story 65. I have really tried to make sleep a priority recently. but the longest I have gone without sleep was about 48 hours when I was in the Marine Corps. Story 66. Somewhere between 36 and 48 hours, there were two occasions, once due to jet lag and insomnia, and the other because of a horrendous toothache caused by a damaged filling. Story 67. 2 days without sleep while studying for my law degree made me realize I wasn't cut out for it. Story 68. I'm not sure how many days in a row, but once I had a 4-day stretch where there was a total of only 9 hours of sleep, with at least one night where I didn't sleep at all. I was working on a presidential campaign. Toward the end of this 4-day stretch, I did a volunteer shift in my local neonatal intensive care unit, under the supervision of nurses who were aware of the situation. On my way out of the hospital, I did an interview with the New York Times that ultimately never ran, which I was very upset about because we talked for about 90 minutes. I wonder why you're hearing from many recreational drug users in this thread, but no mothers. Maybe it's because they get some sleep, albeit too little. The most chronically sleep-deprived people, though, are definitely mothers of children under the age of 3, aside from those with a diagnosed insomnia condition. Story 69. Almost 48 hours. My mom was dying in a different state, and I had no idea she had been hiding it from me until around 11 p.m. when I called the police for a wellness check because I hadn't heard from her in a while. I left for the airport at 3 a.m., arrived at the hospital at 9 a.m., and stayed by her bedside until midnight when my boyfriend urged me to get a few hours of sleep. I obliged, fell asleep on the couch in the intensive care unit room, and woke up at 6 a.m. the next morning. She passed at 6:30 p.m. Story 70. 72 hours exactly. I did everything I could to get past 74, but just couldn't make it. I started hallucinating and feeling aggravated. Story 71. 2 days on amphetamines. I can't go any longer. I start feeling really strange and might just pass out. Thank goodness. Story 72. I was working a shutdown as a maintenance contractor at a manufacturing plant. We couldn't leave until the job was completed. Story 73. Like 74 hours. The first night, there was a really bad storm with tornadoes coming down left, right, and center. I stayed up on behalf of my roommates so I could wake them if we had to take shelter. Luckily, we were not hit directly. An EF4 tornado did indeed land in a semi-residential area, killing and injuring a significant number of people. The next day, we volunteered to help look for others. Some bodies were found in trees, one of which was a child. I didn't sleep that night either. Eventually, the thought of sleep made me feel nauseous, and I couldn't lie down without the room spinning, so I stayed up even longer. I started to get mood swings and began to see things in the corner of my vision. I looked unwell and eventually crashed. I slept for about 16 hours or something crazy like that. I don't recommend this experience. Story 74. It took approximately 48 hours because we had to move out of our apartment, and I worked to pack and move things all day and night. Story 75. In the ballpark of 48 hours, I was working a full-time job and an internship for my career. The full-time job was at night, and the internship was during the day. I also had to account for travel time in between. Luckily, this only happened on Fridays, but it was a bit rough. Story 76. 48 hours spent staying up all night at school. I went home, and just before bed, I saw my lamp turn into a snake. Because of that hallucination, I never stayed up all night again. Story 77. I had about 2 hours of sleep in 36 hours while working as a deep-sea fisherman. The net comes up every 6 hours, and if you're not finished with your work, you may end up going for days. Story 78. I don't know about consecutively, but during one of my last semesters at university, I couldn't get my sleep schedule under control. For 3 months, I switched back and forth between sleeping 18 hours a day and 2 hours a week. Story 79. I came down with pleurisy, which is inflammation of the pleural lining of the lungs. It was so painful I couldn't sit or lie down. It took 2 days for the doctors to address my pain scale and my needs, and prior to that, I had already been up for 24 hours straight. Being awake for that long caused me to see rabbits in my peripheral vision that weren't there. Story 80. 24 hours may not seem like a lot to others who have stayed awake longer, but I have chronic fatigue. I forced myself to stay awake all night because I had a very bad feeling about my ex meeting with his mentally unstable mother the next day. I deliberately kept him awake as well. It turns out my feeling was correct. She had planned to drug and abduct him. Story 81. 2 days? I didn't have the time. I had back-to-back night shifts in the neonatal intensive care unit, and I was too wound up to sleep. Story 82. I think the longest I worked was around 25 or 26 hours straight on 3 separate occasions. Once in college while studying architecture, we had a deadline, and I pushed myself to go the extra mile. I finally slept for about an hour and continued through the rest of the day with classes until I presented my final project. The other 2 times were at my first job at an architecture firm, where the managers were pushing to complete a task in an unrealistic time frame. This pressure was not communicated properly to the upper management, and I was let go some weeks later. Apparently, it was my fault for spending too much time on a project and not managing my time effectively, which was completely unfair. Story 83. Probably around 30 hours, my wife was giving birth, and the baby wasn't coming out. After 30 hours, I started randomly passing out just sitting down. The baby came out after 40 hours. Another time, I drove to another country overnight, which took 26 hours. I fell asleep while driving, just 45 minutes after drinking an energy drink. I woke up thanks to the rumble strips on the side of the highway. I stopped at the next exit and took a nap. Never again. It was so scary. Story 84. 3 days. PlayStation 1 horror binge. Resident Evil 1, Dead Space, Silent Hill. Yes, I beat them all. Yes, I hallucinated intensely on the last day. Story 85. 5 days until the fiscal year end at work. The systems kept crashing, but I was the only one who could keep them running at the time. I fixed that shortly after. Story 86. 5 days during the Siege of Hue in 1968. Under the influence of heroin and armed with automatic weapons, we experienced intense moments. The North Vietnamese army would gather in the underbrush until they had around 500 to 800 soldiers and then charge at us. Some of those unfortunate individuals didn't even have firearms. They ran into the machine gun positions and were cut down. The next wave of North Vietnamese soldiers would run over their bodies in the barbed wire. Story 87. I had 5 days of horrendous sunburn across my shoulders and upper back. No position allowed me to rest or sleep. I couldn't even shower because when the water stopped stinging, it started itching. Story 88. 3 days. The worst 3 days. My wife was in the hospital for the removal of her brain tumor. I didn't sleep the first night. She had complications from the surgery and developed seizures in recovery. She had difficulty recognizing where she was, and who I was. It was hard to visit. I watched my phone with paranoia about the doctors calling, fearing I had missed or would miss the death call. By day 3, if I heard any noise that remotely resembled a phone, my heart would pound in my chest. Our family doctor had to prescribe medication for me to sleep and to manage the panic attacks. Story 89. Some 30 hours, I guess, just to see how much I can. However, 1 month I had severe stress-related sleep problems and could only manage 4 hours of sleep every other night for the whole month. It affected my school performance a bit because of that. Story 90. 36 hours. I took a psychology class. The instructor offered extra credit if we agreed to participate in various experiments conducted by graduate students. Cognitive tests were administered every hour or 2, with vital signs monitored. I began seeing faces talking to me. It was purely visual with no sound effects. Either I or the supervising team could call off the experiment at any time. They decided to end it. Story 91. A little over 3 days, my father-in-law was in the hospital for end-of-life care after a stroke. In their culture, it is customary to be fully dressed when one dies, or one ends up naked in the next world. The entire family was at the hospital, taking shifts to be with him for a while and then trying to sleep on the floor or anywhere we could. Needless to say, I couldn't sleep like that at all. By the end of day 3, I was losing my mind. I thought my wife was going to leave me and that there were people spying on me. It was overwhelming. My wife took me home, and only after sleeping did I realize how unwell I was becoming. Story 92. I spent over 30 hours on a job clearing snow during the winter. There was a massive, never-ending storm, and we had the option to go home at the 20-hour mark to take a nap. However, the two of us decided it would be better to see it through. Ultimately, we were out there for about 30 hours, and I stayed awake at home for another 2 or 3 hours before falling asleep. It was long and tiring, but I wasn't working straight for 30 hours. We were frequently in and out of the truck, driving from place to place. We also cleared lots and driveways for many elderly people on our route because we didn't want to see them stuck indoors or prevent others from reaching them. Story 93. I have had multiple all-nighters trying to study for exams. I am currently pulling one off right now and have not slept for 2 days. Story 94. One time, I accidentally changed my sleep schedule to 30 hours awake and 12 hours of sleep due to a mixture of medications and jet lag. I do not recommend it. Story 95. If you're going more than 24 hours without sleep and you weren't on drugs, you probably just don't remember falling asleep, even for short moments. You know those long blinks? That's sleep. Story 96. About 3.5 days of extended travel by boats, trains, and planes. I slept for 20 hours on the 4th day. Story 97. Probably 40 to 42 hours. For some reason, starting in 5th grade, my friends and I had a 48-hour party every summer where we would try to stay awake for 2 days. Story 98. A little over 48 hours, I was on a Greyhound bus for most of that time, and as a young woman traveling alone, I didn't feel comfortable enough to sleep. Story 99. A little over 100 hours. I was having a bad reaction to my attention deficit hyperactivity disorder medication, paired with the anxiety of my worst semester yet, creating a cocktail of insomnia. I have gone over 50 hours without sleep multiple times, and the side effects are intense. I am not referring only to the mental effects. Story 100. For about 5 to 6 days, I was unable to sleep, managing only a combined total of 3 to 4 hours during that time. I would wake up every night after just 20 minutes of rest, feeling overwhelmed and in tears. I wanted sleep so badly as I was recovering from opiate use. Story 101. I experienced a difficult 4 days after being cheated on in a 14-year relationship. I fell apart but eventually got my life back together over time. I am no longer sure I am capable of feeling that much pain. I was worried about losing my children as well, but thankfully that did not happen. I now have them full-time, and they are very happy. Story 102. 63 hours in a row when I was 16. I had read at the time that it could supposedly cause hallucinations after a certain period. A friend and I found that very exciting, so we tried it. However, after 63 hours, we were so miserable that we stopped and went to sleep without experiencing any hallucinations. Story 103. Probably around 30 hours or so. This would have been back when my cousin and I would have day and night-long gaming sessions when we were about 12 to 15 years old. We were probably playing something like Modern Warfare 2 or Battlefield Bad Company 2. I think we just drank a lot of energy drinks and were having so much fun that we couldn't stop. Story 104. I worked for 37 hours. I pulled an all-nighter playing games with friends and was then called into work to cover a shift. I was desperate for money, so I did it. The shift was enjoyable. Story 105. Max about 32 hours. I studied for my exam, took it, and then boarded a plane to China for vacation. I didn't sleep at all on the plane and hit the ground running. Story 106. I decided to work overtime at Target during Black Friday. There's a point where I reach a level of tiredness where my body just goes on autopilot. Story 107. 6 days, courtesy of bipolar disorder. I woke up on Monday and went to bed Saturday night. I wasn't partying. I was just curious to see what would happen. No drugs, aside from a few cups of coffee each day. Story 108. 2 to 3 days of travel from Hawaii to Switzerland involved layovers, and we were awake very early on the day of the flight. Story 109. I had several flights from Chicago to New York City canceled due to weather. I was going to a music festival there, and my girlfriend had arrived the night before. So I jumped in my car, drove for 12 hours straight, and went right to the festival. I didn't sleep until we returned to the hotel that evening. Story 110. A few days at most. When my mom has strangers over, it scares my cat because she doesn't like anyone other than me or familiar voices. She hides under my duvet to avoid seeing anyone. I can't bring myself to move her, no matter how tired I am, because I don't want to force her out into the open if she doesn't feel comfortable. Story 111. About 2 days ago, I went to the all-night rock club Jilly's Rock World in Manchester and decided to go to London in the morning for fun. I spent the day in London, returned to Stafford in the evening, and went out for drinks. The student days. Story 112. It was about 48 hours for an event called Questival. The event itself lasted 24 hours. Teams entered the competition and aimed to complete as many quests as possible within that time frame. Each quest was worth points and contributed to building community, helping the environment, and doing good. It was locally based, so while I participated in the Chicago event, we had Chicago-specific quest options. We completed quests throughout the city and even ventured up to 2 hours outside of it. We were all over the place, spending the late hours of the night singing to deer and picking up litter in parks. It was truly unforgettable, just good, clean fun. We even won a prize pack in one of the quests for having the most interaction, receiving a bag and bottle from Hoka, the partner brand. Story 113. I spent 48 hours in the hospital when I was 17, though I can't remember why. I was being treated for cancer, and many of those days blur together so many years later. I couldn't sleep for 2 days straight. They gave me sleep medications, specifically Benadryl, the preferred sleep aid at Rady Children's Hospital in Southern California, but it had no effect. By the night of my last day of insomnia, I was seeing shadows move in the corners of my eyes. Story 114. I was a co-owner of a 2-person operation where I screen-printed shirts for mixed martial arts fighters. We attended the matches to sell shirts and other merchandise, like light-up mugs and necklaces. With a significant match approaching, we needed to produce a large quantity of shirts for several fighters. I printed for 12 hours straight in our storage unit in Florida, then traveled for 3 hours to South Carolina, where I printed more shirts at a friend's shop for approximately another 12 hours. By the time I was nearing the end of the printing, I began to see the different ink colors and felt as if they were talking to me. It was a bizarre experience. I slept deeply once I finally finished. Story 115. I completed 100 hours as an experiment. I was writing a story about sleep deprivation and wanted to better understand how it felt. Towards the end, I began to feel quite paranoid. Story 116. This is my favorite topic as I have been sleeping every other day since childhood. I don't sleep daily. I can easily stay up for 7 to 8 days, but I cannot do work that involves calculations or physical labor. I have spent nights like this in cryptocurrency trading and research. Story 117. Probably more than 72 hours. 6-hour shifts with a 6-hour shift afterward. Just a 2-hour nap in between jobs. I did this for over 7 months, slightly on and off. Completely destroyed me. I either had time to shower or sleep in between jobs. This was back in 2021 when I was only 18. I would never recommend it. It sent me into a serious depression that took me a long time to overcome. I remember trying to work while actively falling asleep, almost injuring myself with every step I took. I could barely stand up, and at times I would fall asleep while working, jolting awake with adrenaline to save myself from a serious injury. There was a time in my life when I really needed the money and had no other options. It took me 2 years to recover from this, from fixing my sleeping schedule to getting the right nutrition and taking care of myself again. For a long time after that, I was bedridden, sleeping all day for a month. In the months that followed, I barely had any energy. Then I focused on fixing my sleeping schedule, transportation, and eating. It was a difficult time, and it's crazy that I survived it. Story 118. I spent about 3 or 4 days working on finals for art school. It was one of the worst decisions of my life. I started experiencing auditory hallucinations by the end of it and felt wrecked for weeks. At least I received good grades, though. Story 119. I experienced over 5 years of intense restless leg syndrome. I felt like a zombie, Finally, I discovered a solution that worked. Since I started treatment, I no longer have restless legs and am sleeping soundly. Story 120. I remember getting take-home tests on a Friday, buying a couple of pizzas and some Mountain Dew, and working nonstop until the test was due on Monday at noon. Graduate school. Story 121. 3 full nights and halfway into the 4th day before I had a complete mental breakdown. No caffeine or drugs as I was breastfeeding. I had a very grumpy newborn. They warn you about the loss of sleep when having a baby, but it was overwhelming. Story 122. I am bipolar. Sometimes I get stuck in an extreme feeling of sadness or happiness. Once, I experienced such a happy feeling that I couldn't sleep for 5 days. I was happy for no reason whatsoever. Story 123. I worked for 36 hours during the night, then spent the day with my girlfriend. We went out to a club with her friends. I was nearly in zombie mode. Story 124. Roughly 34 hours, with broken sleep, 3 hours and 1 hour of actual napping. I even fell asleep in the shower in the hospital. This was due to labor, which lasted for about 39 hours. Story 125. I experienced 11 days of sleeplessness due to a combination of Adderall, insomnia, and a manic episode. This occurred a few weeks before I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. The first action taken by the doctor upon my diagnosis was to discontinue Adderall, as it can cause severe mania. The experience was absolutely miserable. I felt extremely tired and unable to sleep. In the final days of that stretch, the anxiety of not having slept for over a week contributed to my inability to rest. Subsequently, I could only manage to sleep for a couple of hours each night, and it took about 5 more days for the manic episode to subside, allowing me to return to normal sleep patterns. Story 126. 48 hours. Thought it was MDMA, but it wasn't. 24 hours, went on a road trip for fishing. Decided to come home the same day. Story 127. 3 days of caffeine, Adderall, and numerous flights across several time zones left me crashed for almost 30 hours afterward. I never want to experience that again. While it's not the longest stretch I've endured, having a newborn disrupts your sleep for a year or more. Story 128. I spent about 58 hours staying overnight with my husband while he was in the intensive care unit. He experienced a medical emergency, and I was too shaken up to sleep for a couple of days. Adrenaline can be quite a powerful force. Story 129. It might have been 2 days. I tried Adderall for the first time in college. Why? I'm not really sure. My friend had a legitimate prescription, so I tried it. I didn't even study. Story 130. I struggled to sleep for 2 days. I finally saw a doctor who prescribed a sleep aid, but even then, I was only sleeping a few hours each night. I just can't win sometimes. Story 131. I went almost 10 days without sleep. Turned out to be anxiety, and it took a while to recover. Story 132. 38 hours. The first day ended with a college party, and I was texting a girl I met there the entire night. The next morning, I had to be back at school with the band because we had a football game at Texas A&M, which was about 3 hours away. We played the game and lost, then headed back home. For some reason, I didn't sleep on either bus ride, but when I finally got home, I stayed up for another couple of hours before heading to bed. It was a great time, but not a great decision on my part. Story 133. My dad gave me my first laptop and internet modem in 2008. It was a unique experience transitioning from an offline computer to one connected to the internet. Story 134. 11 days when I was a teenager were filled with nightmares. I began experiencing auditory hallucinations as a result, until I was finally able to rest. Story 135. I experienced insomnia for about 70 hours and became obsessed with Total War, Warhammer during that time. I had serious sleep issues in my younger years. Story 136. 5 to 6 days is probably the longest stretch. I think it was just the pain. It was a long, difficult 3 months. The insurance refused to pay for my medications, so I went 9 to 12 months without them. During the last 3 months, I couldn't lie down, sit, stand, or move at all without causing wounds on over 90% of my body to split open and bleed. I had to take shallow breaths to avoid further injury. Whenever I attempted to doze off in any position, I would heal against whatever surface my body was touching. Getting out of bed wasn't a great start to the day. My back would stick to the sheets and blanket below me, requiring me to tear myself away like starting a lawnmower every morning. Showers were painful, and I won't forget the color of red swirling down the drain. But yes, 5 to 6 days without sleep were common for at least 3 months. I'm not saying I'm a secondary player, but Luigi is easier to support nowadays. Story 137. I worked about 40 hours during a regular week. Then, a friend and I drove overnight from Ohio to New Jersey for a friend's wedding. The plan was to sleep in the car, but I couldn't. The following day was filled with non-stop bachelor party activities and wedding events, as I was part of the wedding. I didn't want to miss out on seeing people I rarely get to see. Story 138. I honestly forgot how long it was, but it was probably around 50 hours. My girlfriend was kidnapped, and terrible things happened to her. Ironically, that wasn't the longest she has been awake. She recently went without sleep for over 70 hours twice this year and several other times around 48 hours. I don't know how she is able to do that. Sleeping has been extremely difficult for her to the point where nothing works. Just when you think you've figured out the exact combination of factors that work, they don't. Then the cycle starts again. Story 139. I was in a manic state during that time, engaging in many dangerous behaviors without considering the consequences. This ultimately led to a psychotic break, resulting in my hospitalization in a psychiatric ward for a week after I attempted to take my own life. It took 2 full days in the psychiatric ward before I could sleep, and when I did, I experienced sleep paralysis, which affected the quality of my rest. They eventually prescribed me a combination of medications to help me sleep. Story 140. I felt like testing how long I could go without sleep. It turns out that you start to experience effects after 3 days, and I decided that was enough for me. Story 141. About 40 hours. I went to university as usual, came home, and watched all of Twin Peaks Season 1 and Season 2 in a planned marathon. After that, I went out to a pub until late. Story 142. 3 or 4 days have passed, and I am still unsure what happened. In hindsight, it might have been a reaction to my psychiatrist's obsession with prescribing as many amphetamines as possible, as he received bonuses for doing so. I later discovered that he now works in a remote area after fleeing the American Southwest due to accusations of sexual assault involving a patient. Now he works with children. It makes no sense to me. I didn't hallucinate, but I felt constantly terrified, and I kept thinking that the little fuzziness or static in my vision resembled spiders everywhere. Story 143. 4 days. My mom smashed the egg of a spider mother, and the babies spread out. I am afraid of spiders. I can't sleep, thinking they are just near me, possibly going inside my ears and mouth. Story 144. I spent about 48 hours completing the experimental work for my thesis. After approximately 16 hours, I found a rhythm where I could visualize the abstract components of the experiment, and I continued working until I finished. Story 145. A little over 50 hours, I was terrified of falling asleep. Eventually, my body couldn't take it anymore, and I crashed. Story 146. 48 hours. An all-nighter, as we say here in Ireland. I was studying for university exams, but the sleep the following night was delightful. 8 p.m. to 10 a.m. straight through. Story 147. I traveled for a fighting game tournament and arrived 3 hours before it started, so I had to play immediately. I stayed at the venue until 10 p.m. and finally reached my accommodation around 11:30 p.m. Story 148. I remember when I was around 17 or 18 years old. In about 70 hours, I only slept for a total of 4 hours. I was young, full of energy, and I loved to go to music festivals. I arrived home around 6 p.m., went directly to sleep without taking a shower or changing into fresh clothes, and woke up the next day at 1 p.m. Story 149. 4 days. My ex dumped me because she met someone, For days of thinking about what I did wrong. For days of contemplating my worth. I later spoke to her friends. Turns out I never did anything wrong. She was just using me as a distraction, and she wanted to feel loved during that time. Story 150. 24 hours, military. They do not let you sleep the first 24 hours when you arrive at receiving. At least that was the case when I shipped out in 2012. Story 151. 24 hours. Military. The only time in my life when I was being spoken to, and I dozed off, then started awake again. Story 152. Earlier last year, my mental health declined, and I went 3 consecutive days without sleep twice over the course of 2 weeks. I do not recommend it. Story 153. About 4 days ago, I worked 2 jobs and did overtime for both. I didn't really sleep. I just went home, ate, showered, and gamed a bit before heading back out. I crashed for a full day after that. Story 154. 48 hours without sleep before a significant group project was due made me realize that none of my group members completed their work and had no intention of finishing before the deadline. The project accounted for half of our grade in the class. Story 155. 5 days working on a defense system design quotation resulted in no produced hallucinations, which was unusual. Prior to that, I spent 3 days studying for exams in engineering school. Story 156. I was sent to the hospital after my bi-weekly blood test showed that my immune system was essentially non-existent. I was isolated in the hospital for 96 hours, 54 of which I spent awake due to being unable to sleep. Story 157. I worked around 40 hours clearing snow during a relentless storm. I was up for the entire day, went to bed at 11 p.m., and then received a call at midnight. I completed a 32-hour straight shift, repeatedly doing our route to keep the commercial properties open. Eventually, the snow stopped, and the manager asked us to start on the residential properties. I firmly told him no. I reached a point where I could not remember driving from one property to another. I was hallucinating and swerving on the road, thinking I was about to hit small animals or people. At one moment, I nearly crashed into another vehicle when I went through a red light. I informed the manager that we needed sleep because, at that point, I was a liability behind the wheel, and my coworkers were falling asleep while standing. The manager suggested I go home and get 4 hours of sleep, but I firmly told him no. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.